Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar book review. This is going to be my full spoiler review for Avatar The Last Airbender Legacy of the Fire Nation. So I already did a sort of a non-spoiler review, kind of an early preview, because I got a review copy of this book like 2-3 months before release, so I didn't really want to go that in-depth given how far off the book is. But the book is now out tomorrow, February 4th, everywhere, so you can pick up the book if you want. So I feel this is a good time to go fully in-depth. What is everything that's in this book? What are the details? What's worth checking out in it? So, if anyone is unaware, didn't see the first video, what is this book? It's not a comic. What is it? So this is the third in a series of books from the publisher Insight Editions that they've done with the Avatar license. They started off with this book, Avatar Legacy. Then a few months back they did Legend of Korra and Avatar's Chronicle. And now we finally have this one here, Avatar Last Airbender Legacy of the Fire Nation. They're sort of kind of in-universe kind of journal books is probably the best way to say it, in that each of these books is technically meant to be a book written by a character in the show that they gave to a different character, in that this first one here is sort of a journal put together by Aang to give to a younger Tenzin. The Korra one is a journal made by Korra to sort of leave behind to like the next Avatar basically. And then this one, of course, is a journal made by Iroh to give to Zuko. So definitely of the three, the two interesting ones are these two, because they cover sort of ground that we haven't seen before. The Legend of Korra one was a bit of a letdown because it basically was just a recap of the Legend of Korra. There was no real new information in it, and the only like really positive thing about this book was the art throughout from Sora Medina, which thankfully they of course brought her back for Legacy of the Fire Nation, so Sora Medina's art remains a hugely positive thing in this book. And like I said in that early review as well, this is definitely the best of the three, so that's a positive thing straight away. The Iroh sort of focused book is the best of the lot, and it's by a pretty big margin, while I'm still able to acknowledge that I don't think the level of information and detail is probably at where it needs to be for a book on this style. In that, ultimately, the way to look at this is that it is sort of a data book type thing. Other franchises have had these type of things before and have done them in, I think, much better ways where there's been more information to put out. Here, obviously with this one specifically, because it's Iroh and you have Iroh talking about like basically a little bit of everything about the Fire Nation, like some stuff comes out because it had to come out. You couldn't just do a recap book with Iroh as your narrator. But it definitely doesn't have as much as you would think, given that Iroh has so many mysteries, details, things we don't know about. So I appreciate this for having some of those teases, but it doesn't quite do as much as you'd expect. Now, it's a huge gulf in class between this one and like the Legend of Korra one, which didn't really have any new information. This one at least teases some things, but it's important to just get across, while it's the best of the three, it's still not, for me, where it needs to be, and that, you know, this should have tons of information on like Ozai and Iroh's relationship. It should have more information than it does have about Lu Ten. There should be a mention of who Lu Ten's mother is, but there's not. Really obvious, clear-cut things like that this book just can't cover, because very clearly it doesn't seem like there is the same level of sort of creator involvement from, say, like Mike and Brian and the writing team in books like this from Insight Editions, like there are with the comics and the novels and so on. And so it really feels like they can only do very, very small and basic things when we should kind of be getting important reveals from this in many ways. I understand maybe wanting to hold certain things back, because why reveal such important information in a book that a lot of the fandom are probably never going to pick up? And it's because it's not story content as such. It is more of just a data kind of fact file type book. I can see that perspective, but to get this book out there into more people's hands, you have to make it feel more important, and that's what it needs to accomplish. So that's the sort of intro. And let's get into the book in terms of detail. So I'm pretty much going to try and go through it page by page. Obviously, I'm going to just completely skip over the pages where it's just Iroh narrating and he's not really saying anything of note. So I'm really going to try and just pick out the interesting images and interesting kind of pieces of information as we go through it. So, of course, you know, the art from Sora Medina is the highlight of the book, in that arguably you get the entire story of the book just visually through her art as you go through it, and there's probably more takeaway in terms of discussing what the art portrays compared to what there is in terms of discussing what the text says. So some very, very nice stuff here of just Iroh and Zuko kind of through the years there. Very nice kind of opening page here as Iroh gives his intro into like what the book actually is. Here's a really nice image of sort of Iroh when he was, you know, still a Fire Nation general, kind of a little bit more threatening than usual, while, you know, still of course being Iroh. And a lot of the early section of the book is just sort of Iroh sort of, you know, pondering over the shadowed history of the Fire Nation kind of royal family, basically since Sozin onwards, and, you know, the path that they've been on as you kind of move into the next page of the book, where you have, of course, that history of Roku and Sozin, which we know quite well because 306 from the show covers it in all the detail that we need. So this is very much just a recap. It doesn't really add anything new. The next page, though, is very interesting, mainly because of this image. Now, immediately you're wondering, like, okay, who is this? Who's this character, and then who's that up there? And it's been revealed that this is actually a young Azulon. And so this is obviously Sozin watching Azulon train. Really, really interesting in that, like, whoever thought we'd see an image of a young Azulon training, and like only a book like this really would be able to show something like that. And the page here, I like sort of the idea that it gets across, and that the whole idea of this kind of evil legacy of Fire Lords is just this sort of continuation of Sozin. Azulon had all the pressure from Sozin to kind of turn out this way, and then both Iroh and Ozai had pressure from their father, Azulon, to turn out this way. And the same, obviously, with Azula and Zuko with Ozai. So it's just this history, and in a way, this book is all really about highlighting how what took Iroh on a different path, that he was sort of heading down onto the same one as like Ozai was, and also Iroh reflecting on what turned Zuko away from sort of a similar path. As we go into the next page, we get a nice sort of shot there of the brothers, Iroh and Ozai, of course, as well as a page covering sort of some of Iroh's details of Ozai. Now, this is one of those dynamics where, like, you realize, like, it is incredible with the Avatar franchise that it is a fact that Iroh and Ozai have never spoken on screen. They've never said a word to each other. I believe the only scene that they've actually sort of really been in together is actually the Agni Kai between Ozai and Zuko. And even then, like, Iroh is just watching that happen. He's not actually interacting with his brother. So what is actually said here about their dynamic is actually sort of interesting, even if it does very much tie into the little bits and pieces Iroh and Ozai have sort of said about each other in the series. He just says, "My dearest nephew, I know I don't often speak of your father, but the deepest scars take the longest to heal. Believe it or not, reopening old wounds over tea is not my favorite pastime, but you deserve to know more. From the day your father could crawl, the fire in him burned bright. He was stubborn and impatient. It seemed like nothing could slow him down, not even me. As we grew up, we grew competitive, as brothers do. But his ambition was often far greater than my own. We would fight like warriors over games of Pai Sho, where he would grow frustrated and in fits of rage flip over the board, spilling pieces in the air and often burning them. At first, anyone could dismiss his fury as little more than temper tantrums, but I worried it was something worse than an impetuous heart. In school, he showed ruthlessness that I envied for a time, but the older we got, the clearer it was for me to see that one day we would all get burned. The fire in our people, the fire in your father and in you, has the ability to provide warmth, inspire community, and sharpen the spirit. When unbidden and untempered, however, it will destroy, break, and lay waste to the worlds of man. When I looked into my brother's eyes, there was only fire and ash, and in his chest a heart of ice. Sometimes I blame myself. I search my past for some moment when I could have reacted differently or been a better guide for my brother. But looking back instead of forward is a fool's errand, and I'm too old to play the fool. There have been times, nephew, when I've seen your father in you. But more than that, I've always known you would become the man I wish your father had been. There is much about my brother I wish had been different, but I will always be grateful he was here because he brought me you. So there's glimpses throughout the text of good writing that's building on stuff that we didn't know about before. Those little teases of that's how it was growing up. Iroh was always more calm, composed. Like, this is presenting information on Iroh as well as Ozai here, of just like, it's never been overly clear of like, was Iroh more like aggressive, sort of like Ozai in the past, or not? Here it gets across the idea that while he was still sort of heading down that path early on towards maybe being the next continuation of the Fire Lord line of like Sozin Azulon, in a way, Ozai turning out much more like their father is part of what sort of really separated Iroh kind of from that kind of path. But we'll see, of course, the Lu Ten stuff in a couple of minutes, what really turned it down that path. But it definitely gets across the idea of, you know, Ozai very much being the sort of Zhao sort of like character growing up, and Iroh being much more sort of composed. So pretty interesting stuff. The next page is just sort of general on the Fire Nation. The art here is very nice because it shows 5 Fire Lord portraits, of course. Middle bottom you have Ozai. Here you have Sozin. Here you have Azulon. And then these 2 up top, I suppose, have to be Fire Lords from before Sozin's time, which is pretty interesting. Some new designs there for different Fire Lords. Now, we know some of this stuff because Smoke and Shadow, the comic series, they go into the like catacombs of the old like Fire Lords, and so there's like portraits of some of them. So like we get a sense for like the history of it. But it's nice to get some of that here. The text there is pretty, you know, basic, sort of to the point of just like, you know, their trade, commerce, weaponry is what, you know, led ultimately to, you know, what happened with, you know, Sozin wanting to expand that into the rest of the world and so on. Nothing particularly of note to say there. This page here, you can see here, has one of the pullouts that comes in these books. It's just a very basic sort of map of at least part of the Fire Nation. I wish it had sort of said that along those lines, because like this is just kind of map of like the Fire Nation royal capital, in that like we know the Fire Nation is actually, you know, a group of islands basically, if you really want to view it that way, and that it's only just that section that is like the capital, like the biggest island is sort of like the capital and so on. So yeah, it's pretty much you know, just gets across the idea of, you know, Iroh talks about the Fire Nation's ego is ultimately sort of what led to the war happening, and that he sought to better himself by gaining insight from the other, you know, benders, other nations of the world. And this is sort of what led to him, you know, going on this journey of self-discovery, and that's kind of what the next page sort of covers. And we get a section here with the Dragon of the West segment, which, interestingly here, I don't know if you'll take this as a reveal or not. A good deal of my knowledge and insight comes from studying under the Sun Warriors and the Last of the Dragons. They are called Shaw and Ran, and they were patient with me. One dragon was red, the other blue, but both taught me temperance in all things. Now, it's always been this thing with Ran and Shaw, that it's never been revealed which one is which. Which is the blue one, which is the red one? Is Ran red because of the or thing, or not? The order, if you take this as sort of being a canon thing, he says Shaw and Ran, and then says red and blue. So is he saying Shaw is red, Ran is blue? I'm not really sure. I'm assuming it was written in this way because it is not, there's no reveal ever anywhere about which one is which. And this, to me, keeps it a mystery. Not that it's a mystery that I think needs to be kept, because I think people would just prefer to know which is which. But anyway, he mentions here that the Sun Warriors were the ones who taught him the breathing fire technique, and again about the whole lying about, you know, him getting the title of dragon by killing a dragon. Next page just sort of covers, you know, his views on bending and breathing, and we get another one of these kind of inserts here. This time it's firebending forms. As you can see there, I think it's meant to be Iroh and Zuko here, and you read them down. So the first one is like the first column, you view it going down, that's one technique. The second one is like Zuko demonstrating another one all the way down, and so on. It's pretty interesting, you know, it doesn't really say which, you know, firebending form is which, like in terms of names, but it's pretty nice. He mentions, you know, how breathing is key to how he sort of learned about bending and then about lightning and so on. Pretty nice. Next page, 2-page spread here, is definitely one of the more interesting ones in the book. It's obviously about the Order of the White Lotus. Very nice shot here of the full Order of the White Lotus there as we know them. Of course, we've got, you know, Bumi, Paku, Zhongzhang, Piandao. And it's interesting what he says here, because especially one section I was just like, yes, finally, confirmation of sort of something I've been talking about in some of my videos, without going fully in depth into it, you know. So here's what he says. The Order of the White Lotus was always supposed to stay a secret. It wasn't until the world needed us that we exposed ourselves. For many years, the Order was just a group of like-minded individuals dedicated to the notion of uniting the four nations through a shared knowledge and kinship. We continued our experience and paths to enlightenment, and we expanded our duties to include protection and training of the Avatar for the good of all mankind in this world and the next. When we were smaller, we used games of Pai Sho as cover for sharing information with one another, but as our membership grew, we developed more involved symbols and codes using the Pai Sho tiles. We were even able to plan and strategize together in full public view, and most people never even knew we existed. As Grand Lotus, I was responsible for leading as needed, and I alone could summon the Order of the White Lotus and assemble its members for battle. King Bumi, Piandao, Zhongzhang, and Paku were all fierce warriors of the Order. We were at our best when we were all together, which made the defection of Zhai Bao and the members of his Red Lotus faction all the more heartbreaking. While they had lofty goals to reconnect the spirit world with our physical world, their aversion to government of any kind always seemed so childish to me, and against the very tenets that first brought us all together. For the future, I hope that the Red Lotus and the White Lotus will reunite and evolve into something new, something better. Maybe they will become something bigger, an army keeping the good of the people, the Avatar, and the world at heart. What I really like about that is just that you could very much view the mention of Zhai Bao back in Legend of Korra as being this, like, Zahir talking about a character from history, like hundreds of years ago almost. But once you think about the timeline of things and so on, it's like, surely we would have heard about the Red Lotus if they were active during the time of ATLA and so on. So that really got across the idea that they're a more recent organization than you think. And the fact that, like, the images of them kind of together during the, you know, taking back Ba Sing Se and so on. This is obviously Iroh writing this post-ATLA. So it gets across this idea that while it doesn't place in the timeline like exactly when Zhai Bao defected, it seems to sort of imply that it happens at some point going forward from like where the comics are right now. And that it is this, the Red Lotus is like this organization that is only about, you know, 70 or so years old. If you take it as it has happened already, and that Zhai Bao has defected like prior to everything that we see in ATLA, then it still only makes the group maybe about 100 years old at most. Simply the fact that this directly states Iroh knew Zhai Bao, they were in the Order of White Lotus together, is a very notable thing to me. And I'm glad that it's in here. And that is something that's new that we hadn't really heard before. Just seeing it told from that other perspective. We got explained the how the Red Lotus was created by Zahir. Now we get the Order of White Lotus perspective of like, okay, pretty nice. Again, that's where I wish like they had maybe had a page on Zhai Bao getting across who he was, but you know, that's probably one of those stories that can be told somewhere else that they want to hold back on. Next up, the Siege of Ba Sing Se. Very nice double page spread here of Iroh having, you know, clearly just broken through the wall there. Has his army there with him, the Earthbenders. And this is an interesting page here. For any other soldier, the siege of Ba Sing Se would have been career-making, no, history-making. But for me, that terrible day was both something worse and something better. Fire-hearted warriors will claim that having no loved ones makes you a fiercer fighter, but in my experience it's the opposite. For 600 days, my armies and I laid siege to this beautiful city until finally we breached its great wall. But the moment of my greatest military victory was also my greatest defeat, as nearby my boy Lu Ten lay dying. So I believe that is actually the first time we've actually heard confirmation that, you know, him breaching the walls and that sort of victory, the first time that the walls really had been broken, was an event that more or less coincided almost exactly with Lu Ten being like injured during the battle and dying. You know, you could probably piece it together, but it is nice to get it just said to us in that way, of that the moment of his greatest victory was also the moment of his greatest defeat. That it wasn't that like they had broken through the walls, battle before they fully broke through and then Lu Ten died, but like, no, the breach of the walls is kind of the event that sort of led to Lu Ten's death. That is, it's something new, at least, because we know so little ultimately about Lu Ten. He also says on the other page, war comes with a heavy cost. I just didn't know how high until that dark day. It cost me my pride, my place in my nation, and in my own family. And worst of all, my son. The man I used to be, heir to the Fire Nation, general of its armies, father of Lu Ten, all died that day on that field of battle. I thought I had nothing left to give, that my life was over, but I would discover the biggest adventure was yet to come. I was reborn that day, I just didn't know it yet. The fates were setting me on the path to enlightenment and the path to you, Zuko. Most warriors, most fathers, most men for that matter, don't get a second chance at anything, let alone their lives. But thanks to you, Zuko, I got so much more than that. So that's an interesting one, of just seeing him sort of reflect there on the death of Lu Ten. It's like seeing him actually state, like, super clearly, like, we already knew this from the show, of course, but it being written in this way of, like, it was at that moment that, like, all of this stuff went away. Him being the heir, being the general of the Fire Nation, being the father of Lu Ten, all went away in that moment, and it was what started him on his path. And it sort of sets in stone, like, a lot of, like, the placement of some of this stuff in a way that I quite like. In that I think this more or less places some of this stuff on the timeline, in that, like, him mentioning the Dragon of the West stuff prior to the Siege of Ba Sing Se, I think that is roughly meant to be viewed as, like, timeline placing, which we didn't actually know before. And then we'll get to something in a minute here. I suppose I'll read to say, like, Ozai and the Crown here, as we get the, I suppose, what would have been Iroh's portrait as Fire Lord, if that were to ever happen. There is something contagious in war. In my days as general, I too caught the virus of power and was drawn into the madness of battle. The mantle of Fire Lord was in my blood, and it boiled with desire. As firstborn, I was in line to become Fire Lord, but that honor was taken from me by your ambitious father. Even now, I can picture the path not taken. Iroh the Fire Lord, scourge of the Fire Nation. How the world would fear me. But no, after the loss of my own father and my son, my spirit wouldn't allow it, and the fates intervened on my behalf. Not succeeding my father as Fire Lord was a great gift that at the time felt like a tremendous failure. But now time has taught me that this loss was the greatest gift I could have ever received. Sometimes knowing what you really want is not as important as getting what you need. That's a nice piece of advice there. Interesting, actually, just kind of noticed it there as well, like the dragon at the bottom there, pretty cool. But yeah, this is a page I think a lot of people have kind of talked about, having seen sort of previews of this one. Losing Lu Ten is the title of this page. And of course, we know this very well from the Tales of Ba Sing Se. We've seen that image basically exactly. But the one on the other page there, very, very nice to see something like that. A younger Iroh with Lu Ten. You get the impression that this is probably like probably just a bit prior to the Siege of Ba Sing Se, probably before the siege even happens, full stop. But here's what he says: the greatest losses can also break you, but they can also remake you. Losing my son, your cousin Lu Ten, changed the course of my entire life. You know this already. What you may not know is that my time in the spirit world, hoping to connect with my son, was sadly unsuccessful. I never found Lu Ten. Instead, I discovered myself. It was there that I renewed my passion for life. I would no longer be a general who took life. I would strive to be an enlightened uncle who embraced it. So, I believe that is like one of the clearest ever mentions of like that trip to the spirit world, of like it happens after the death of Lu Ten. That is what informed it, and that was what he was trying to do. Because I do believe it was always just speculation on our part as fans, that we thought that that was why he did it. Now it's nice to get confirmation of that, and that, okay, obviously he didn't succeed, because we know, mainly I think because of stuff from Korra, that the spirit world isn't the afterlife or anything like that. So, you know, that's nice to get that confirmed. But anyway, at the bottom of this page he says, that new lease on life led me to you, my prince. What I lost in Lu Ten, I gained in you, Zuko. Because I cared about you and your journey. Because I gave of myself, my chi grew, and so did my heart. You gave me a second chance to be the kind of father I always wanted to be, free of the chains of the Fire Nation, and instead working for the good of all nations, starting with you. You are a gift in my life, Zuko, and I'm so honored to be your uncle. I hope this part makes you cry. Just make sure you don't cry on this ink, it will run, and so will all of this wonderfully poetic sentiment. And ultimately, like, that's all we really get in this book on Lu Ten, is just, once again, sort of the mention of his death. Like, the fact that he never this book doesn't really ever cover, like, you know, a page just on Lu Ten and who he was. Like, this is the type of character he was. He was heading more down my path than Ozai's. They don't say anything like that. And that's the only unfortunate thing here, is that Lu Ten still sort of just feels like a character who sort of exists just as a death in a way in the story, and not almost like as a character of his own. And it's why, like, I want a story to be told with Iroh, so that we can cover more of this stuff going forward. Yeah, you know, the next bit is just sort of covering some of the, you know, rivalry type stuff, the issues within the family. There's the Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula. Next page is actually very, very interesting. It is the Fire Nation kind of a royal family tree. Now, this is at the same time one of the best pages in the book, and also one of the ones that probably should have had more in it. I'll cover what's in the letter in a second. The details of the text aren't particularly interesting, I find. Let me just actually take this letter off so I can show you the full page properly. So yeah, let's focus on this side of the tree first. So, of course you have Sozin there, but interestingly, it's sort of Sozin at like an era of his life that we didn't quite know about before, just like the artist's portrayal there. Like a slightly younger Azulon is nice to see. Sort of the kind of middle-aged Iroh and Ozai, very nice to see as well. There's another shot of Lu Ten, Zuko and Azula, of course. But it's the other side of the tree that's, I think, very, very interesting. Because, of course, you have Roku and Ta Min, of course. Their daughter is Rina, and then she marries Jinzuk. They have Ursa. Ursa, of course, has children with Ozai, but also with Ikem. And then, very interestingly here, Kiyi. There is an older portrayal of Kiyi. Kiyi is only like, I don't know, like what, 6, 7 maybe in the comics? But this is very clearly a Kiyi who's probably like at least, you know, 12, 13, 14 or something like that. Maybe even older. I'm not exactly sure what exact portrayal they were trying to go for here, but it's clearly a very different look for Kiyi. That's nice to see. In that, like, it's great that she was included here, because based on like the previous books, I would have expected them to have not included her like at all. So it's actually nice to see. Similarly, actually, it is our first time seeing Jinzuk and Rina being younger as well. So, you know, that's very, very cool. Again, once again, highlighting the art as being the clear highlight. But again, we have to bring up the characters that are missing on this family tree more so than addressing what the positives are. We know that Azulon's wife is Ela. We know that is the name, and it's interesting that there's no design presented, not even a name mentioned for her. There's no mention of Sozin's wife. There's no mention of Iroh's wife, like Lu Ten's mother, which is probably the biggest thing in a book about Iroh, that like there's just a blank here, like it doesn't matter apparently. Then with Zuko as well, like a lot of people would have liked to have seen like Mei here or something like that, to go into like Izumi, but even though like it's sort of unclear exactly when most of this book is meant to have been put together, but it's clearly from when Zuko was like older. Like I think at the very least it's like Republic City sort of era Zuko. So it is weird in that, like, are they implying that like Mei and Zuko potentially don't get back together until like much later on, or what? But again, that's just the weirdness of some of the reveal type stuff in this franchise of like, why is it still up in the air about who Zuko, like who Izumi's mother is, and so on. This page is quite interesting in that it's kind of just this, the three characters that Zuko has an Agni Kai with. So Zhao, Ozai, and Azula, and just the sort of contrast between them all of like the Agni Kai with Ozai sort of in a way starting Zuko's journey. The Agni Kai with Zhao demonstrating both the kind of negatives and positives of Zuko so early on in the series, of the fact that he took it on so like aggressively was this negative, but how he chose to end it was a positive, and then how developed he is as of the fight with Azula. Next up, just more addressing like throughout the series, basically travels with Zuko throughout ATLA. Just some nice images basically from the show. Interestingly, Cabbage Merchant there in the background of this shot. But yeah, nothing particularly amazing to say with that. It is the only mention of Mei in the entire book, though. It says here, our time together stretched and pulled at our relationship. Whether we were stuck in the desert, or you were grinding your teeth in your sleep, or we were living through your relationship with Mei, you and I stood together and walked a deadly, extraordinary, hilarious, and legendary path. And it's just like, that's a weird spot to be like the only place where like Mei is mentioned in like the entire book. But anyway, we have the page just generally covering Team Avatar and the incredible effect that him meeting them had on him, both in terms of like them being the enemies to him initially, as like creating a drive for him, but then being so important to him as a person when he eventually like switched sides, I suppose. Here's the page of Iroh talking about Katara. And there's a great praise here for Katara at the very start. Outside of the Avatar himself, young Katara always struck me as the most powerful, if undisciplined bender of the age. She was certainly the whetstone against which you honed and sharpened your fury, at least for a time. And like the rest of it, like this, and as well as the pages covering the other members of Team Avatar, this is probably where the writing should be more than what it is, in that it's nice reflection of Iroh on that character, but it's very clearly on that character only addressing scenes from the show that we know about. Like nothing new, implying that basically there was no notable interaction between Iroh and this character in like the aftermath of ATLA type thing. It just feels very weird that it's only episodes of ATLA basically that are like mentioned in any of these scenes. This is where it's probably the clearest that they're not really giving any new information or anything like that. So no, it's a nice reflection on Katara's character from Iroh, but nothing like we haven't heard before in terms of character analysis. You know, with Sokka, of course, here, you just get him talking about, you know, that Sokka's like almost like a sarcasm bender, and that like his special talent is just the stuff that comes out of his mouth and the way he speaks and so on, but also that, you know, Sokka's trip with Zuko was a very important one and so on, and so on. Like it's just nice to see that. With Aang, again, like it's a nice image of Aang here from the artist Sora Medina once again, with Appa there, of course. And yeah, you know, again, it's a classic comparison here of just, you know, Aang was ultimately the character that you needed within your life to kind of really bring you, change your mind to things, open up new perspectives and so on. And it's just a nice reflection. You know, they quickly run through like Toph, Appa, and Momo here, with, you know, the nice page there for Toph, for sure, with the art. With Appa, of course, they mentioned the whole Lake Laogai thing, and that like him deciding to free Appa was ultimately this huge step in his development and so on. They mentioned with Toph that like, you never took a life-changing field trip with her, but, you know, she was still important in your development. And then with Momo, there's like a reference to, of course, what Boomy said about him. Of course, I would never want to leave out a very important member of the team, Momo. Momo, like Aang himself, Momo seemed to represent the spirit of the lost Air Nation, full of life and sometimes heroic instincts. He was a holdover from a different age who brought joy and comfort to our trials. He was also awfully cute, wasn't he? So that's nice there. The next is sort of the reverse of the last few pages of, like, it's Katara, you know, Aang, Sokka, and so on, writing letters to Iroh. And obviously this is where we get the idea that this is where the book is actually set. It's being set when the characters are older. So you can see here in probably one of the best pages of art in terms of revealing new stuff to us. This is obviously Katara with a very young Kaya, and then a, you know, slightly older Boomy, of course. Just very nice to see them there, with Iroh going to visit them. It's just a really... That's the sort of stuff that we want to see in, like, the comics going forward. Like, it feels so weird why they're going through it so slowly when they could cover ground that features like Katara during this era. Again, this is again where it highlights that they probably should have more information in the text, in that, you know, Dear General Iroh, long ago you were my enemy, and then you were my friend. Now looking back, I see that you were so much more. Almost every time we met, whether you were on my side or not, you seemed to be doing the right thing, and you were always focused on leading Zuko by example. The way you fought for the life of the Moon Spirit and saved us in the Crystal Catacombs, every time you did an honourable thing, even if it caused you bodily harm, as it often did, when we ran afoul of your niece Azula. When you guided us through our final confrontation with Ozai, and I elected to support Zuko in his battle against Azula, you encouraged me. That alone told me that I was doing the right thing, because the right thing was all Iroh ever did. If you approved of my actions, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was doing the right thing. That gave me confidence to help my friends and to do the impossible. I couldn't have done that without you. Thank you, dear Iroh, for always being exactly who I needed you to be. I know, yes, I miss your incredible tea. Gratefully, Katara. So, once again, it's just like, that's nice if it was written by Katara in the immediate aftermath of ATLA. It feels a little weird for Katara now with kids. So much time passed, like events and stuff having happened in the intervening years, for like nothing about like the last few years to it all be mentioned, and it to still only be about, you know, the fight in Ba Sing Se and the confrontation heading into Sozin's Comet. It just feels just a little bit weird. The Toph one, of course, because she can't write, they get across the idea that, like, Katara wrote this for me, and it's just, you're very powerful for an old man. I'm not sure what's stronger, your puns or your bending. Thanks for the tea. That's really all it is. Nice image. Sokka's one feels a little bit weird in that, like, it's like, hey, Zuko's Uncle Iroh, Katara's making me write this letter because she thinks she's our mother. Anyway, you're pretty funny for an old guy, and you're pretty funny for a funny guy. Please stop making me drink your tea. Thanks for helping us out and being old, or whatever it is Katara wants me to thank you for. Signed, the leader of Team Avatar for life. No takebacks, no erases, Sokka. P.S. Are you sure there's no bending for jokes? How about bending for gas? Or is that just breaking wind? So, you know, just, you know, Sokka being Sokka. The most interesting thing, once again, the art, of course, seeing, you know, just seeing like Katara visit, you know, Toph as chief of police, and then seeing like a clearly older Sokka, potentially chief of the tribe, writing a letter is nice. We get Aang and Zuko clearly somewhere in Republic City. Pretty nice just to see them there together. And then this one's pretty okay, of just him thanking Iroh for helping Zuko to get on the path that he needed to, and the advice that he gave him along the way. It's, you know, once again, just that idea of like, yeah, it really comes across as if it's a letter written immediately after ATLA rather than when the characters are in their like late 20s. It just feels like 10 years of interaction is just ignored between the characters. Nice shot of Jasmine Dragon there, just getting across that, you know, this is an important, you know, this is Iroh having found his, you know, destiny in a way. It is ultimately, you know, making tea in the tea shop, and that's what really drives him going forward. On the next page, you get a menu for the tea shop. We have the Metal Brew, the Ba Sing Quan, White Lotus Tile, the Bender Tea, the Appa Blend, and the Red Blooded Nephew. So just an idea of the menu of the Jasmine Dragon. he just reflects on, you know, their exploration between just being tea makers to him getting a tea shop, and how he came to name it and so on. It's just a joke about the whole tea weevil thing. The White Lotus, the Pai Sho section up next is pretty nice, you know, seeing Zuko and Iroh play. Just some decent stuff. There's some facts about Pai Sho, kind of, from Iroh. This game may or may not have been invented by the spirits themselves, and so on. Just pretty to the point. The road ahead. This is basically where the book shifts from being about sort of reflecting on the past to sort of like the future of the character, and that, like, this is where we definitely get into the stuff that is transitioning from the ATLA era into the Korra era. Zuko, we have reached the part of my book when we must face an uncertain future. I've shared our family's ancient past and the story of our journey together in order to give you the benefit of an old man's perspective, such as it is and was. But now we are entering virgin territory, and it is thrilling. It took me decades to develop the knack for it, but now the unknown fills me with excitement. And for you, I wish days of hope, a belly full of gratitude, and eyes filled with optimism. That undiscovered country over the hill waits for us, waits for all of us who are ready to embrace the dream of tomorrow. We get into the spirit world next, of course, where we know Iroh still is as a spirit now. Here's what he says. I've decided that one day soon I will journey to the spirit world and leave this body behind. I know that it will be a journey I must take alone, though I'm looking forward to those I may run into while I'm there. Only the enlightened may travel there and return, so I must have been doing something right, eh, nephew? The path to enlightenment has been a long and arduous one, and I look forward to what I might find in the other world. I will meditate and leave my body and my bending behind. My work is done in this world now, and I'm sure that there are travelers in the spirit world, whose chi needs my tea. My spirit has taken brief trips there before, but my grief and connection to this realm have pulled me back. Once I traveled there to speak with my son, but I have since learned that the spirit world is not exactly the realm of the dead. There are free spirits and dark spirits and animal spirits in this world. Most living humans should never travel there, but I'm not like most, as you well know. There's a fog there, a prison for lost souls, but I trust that will not occupy my time while I travel in that world. Food does not add to the weight of your spirit there, something I'm greatly looking forward to, but they have no bathrooms in the spirit world, and I look forward to that less. I picture it as my last great adventure, and I almost wish you were coming with me, but I know that you have much good left to do here in this world. Your work is not done, my nephew. So that's pretty nice, just getting across the idea. His spirit has taken brief trips there before, but because of, you know, his grief over Lu Ten, he's always stepped back, and we saw earlier on in the book that he did mention the failure of his trips to the spirit world to try and find Lu Ten, because that's not what the spirit world is. Next page is interesting in that, like, it's Korra, because obviously that page was written at a time where he says, one day soon I will travel to the spirit world. So the rest of the book is basically the idea, at least this page, is that post him being in the spirit world, he reveals that he can't actually write anything down. So Korra leaves a brief note before Iroh's sort of note. Fire Lord Zuko, I've never written a letter quite like this one, because I actually haven't written this letter at all. Your uncle Iroh did. Recently I spent some time in the spirit world and I met your uncle. Even as a spirit, he remains a charming and honorable man. He spoke very highly of you. He also made an exhaustive number of jokes. Your uncle also asked me if he could dictate a letter I could bring back to you, and it was my honor to oblige. Be well, Korra. So Iroh's note continues from here. My dear prince, Boo, I'm writing you a letter from the spirit world. I'm so scary. I will haunt you for all your days. And then in brackets it says here, from Korra, he made me write that. I kid. Here I was, minding my own business in the spirit world, when who should I meet? Why, the next avatar. She's a plucky young waterbender named Korra, and I convinced her to write this letter for me. One of the few disadvantages of being in the spirit world is not being able to write anything down. It is quiet here, so quiet. At first it took getting used to, but humming or singing a tune helped. Now I know quiet to be a sign of peace like I never felt before I got here. I do find my heart and my thoughts turning to you, my nephew, from time to time. I just wanted you to know that even here you are with me, and I hope you know I'm still with you. I have found joy here and have reunited with many who went before us. It is better than I could have dreamed, but I have not cut myself off from the old world quite yet. I hear your world is changing, moving on, moving forward, as I know you are. It brings me much joy to think of the life you now live. Put this in that journal I gave you, this book, of course, and when you miss me, you can read these words. Now, while you excuse me, there are vexing spirits here who owe me a game of pie show. So, pretty interesting stuff here, just Iroh's reflection of his time in the spirit world. It is interesting. There's one line here I wanted to go back to here. I found joy here and have reunited with many who went before us. I don't really know what to make of that necessarily. In that, like, what's he referring to there? Like, it was basically just said earlier on, like, this is not the realm of the dead, and then they seem to almost be implying that that's the case here. Or is it just that he's, like, met a few people who have come into the spirit world, or spirits that he met on his previous trips there? Just a little bit interesting to talk about. Last page of the book is just, hopes for the future. This is actually like the last thing he wrote for the journal. So the idea is that Zuko, having this journal, has put the previous few pages like in here, but this is actually like Iroh before he goes to the spirit world, leaving this in here, I believe. Zuko, this is likely the last entry I will make in this journal. I could never tire of the sound of my own voice. But I could never tire of them. Yeah, that's correct. But I know its silence will signal something better, the future. In my very first letter to you, I was only half joking when I called this book The Legacy of the Fire Nation. You, Zuko, and the choices you make going forward, not the ramblings of an old man, are the true legacy of the Fire Nation. The past, like the treasured memories of my time with you, are ashes on the wind, nothing more. The only fires worth keeping alive are the ones we light for the future, for our children, nephews, nieces, and grandchildren. As I prepare to move to the spirit world, I trust you to that good work, my prince. I will miss your voice and your face, my nephew, but I know that I'm proud of you and always have been. With love and admiration, your Uncle Iroh. P.S. The more you practice your pie show, the better you will get at it. Probably, but maybe it's just not your game. So that's pretty interesting. And then, of course, we get this image that, I suppose the idea is that, like, this image doesn't actually, like, happen as such, but this is kind of the reflection at the end of the book, is that this wish of, like, this moment to happen, of just an older Zuko talking to that older Iroh. But yeah, that's most of the book. The only thing I want to go back to is that throughout the book, there are 3 letters from Zuko. Here's one of them. So you can see here it says, to Uncle Iroh from Zuko, age 7. If we open it up, it's just a really brief note here. Nothing too fancy. Dear Uncle Iroh, I'm excited to see you. The Fire Festival is coming and I want you to buy me a paper dragon. Mom says I should say please. If you buy me a paper dragon, I will say please. Deal? I like your jokes, Azula does not. She's not funny, you are. I hope you will come back from war battles soon and teach me more pie show tricks. I like it when you are with me, Uncle. I like it when you come over. Please come. Zuko, age 7. P.S. I like paper dragons. So that's pretty nice. Definitely some good writing there to get across, a younger Zuko. And the fact that he's always liked Iroh. So let's find the middle letter. Where is it? Here we go. Yeah. So this is like Zuko in his, like, I think mid-20s, give or take. You'll get the context from the note. Dearest Uncle, greetings from Republic City. I must keep this letter brief because I am due downtown soon. I have a meeting with Aang regarding challenges we are facing with law-breaking benders, and we have a lot of work to do. It seems like a lifetime ago we were enemies, and now we have come so far. The future burns brighter than the past, and with good reason. The world is getting larger, and the city flourishes in ways you would not believe. It's funny, but as I grow older, I find your words coming out of my mouth when asked for advice or when dealing with the anger and fury in others. I hear you in my ear, sharing the wisdom and guidance you offered to me when I was so full of fire I could not control it. I was blessed to have you as an uncle. Your guidance as you mentored me through those hard but extraordinary days serves me even now, and likely will for the rest of my life. I will always be grateful to you, Uncle Iroh, for being you, your loving nephew, Zuko. So that's a pretty nice letter, just, this reflection. He's writing a letter back to Iroh, even though all this like important Republic City stuff is kind of happening right now. And he's just reflecting that as he's getting older, he's sort of noticing the advice that Iroh gave to him, he's now giving out to others. So nice reflection. And then very last page of the book, we get this letter here. And it's actually a fold over one, so it's a bit larger. Full kind of page type thing. The front of it says, to Uncle Iroh from Zuko, age ... much older than 7. So they don't give an exact age here, but here's what it says. Dearest Uncle Iroh, do you remember when I used to write you letters? It must be this place having its effect on me. But here on Ember Island, I find myself introspective and thinking back about my life. I think I used to write you to buy me presents. Such a cheeky child. I've retired now, given up my throne for the peace of this place, to be warmed by the sun and my own memories. I think of you often here. My good memories wash over the bad ones like waves on the shore, clearing the old sand and resetting. I remember summers on the beach, playing with Azula. We didn't want to kill each other then, though sometimes we acted like it. But the island brought us together. It did that again one time in our teens. It was a golden time, one I never felt again until Aang, Katara, Sokka, Toph and I had finished our journey and had a moment to enjoy each other's company. I'm old now, and you have been gone to the spirit world a great many years. I don't really know why I'm writing you this letter. Perhaps just thinking of you brings me back to your voice, and writing to you brings you back to my side, where I could always count on you to be. I will probably just put this letter with the others in that journal you gave me all those years ago, at least for safekeeping. I could go back and read them all again, but I don't need to. I've memorized your words, Uncle, and so keep you with me at all times. You're with me every day and on every adventure, and now the beach calls. They sell paper dragons there. Might pick one up. Zuko, age much older than 7. So, pretty nice there. Just a story told across 3 of the sort of inserts in the book is a pretty nice thing, with the idea of like this kind of a multi-layered book of like Iroh put together most of the journal, but Zuko's included the few letters that like he wrote. So Iroh kept some of the letters that Zuko sent him from earlier in his life, and then this one that Iroh actually, I suppose, technically never got, Zuko just wrote it and placed it in here. So it's one of those ones where like it obviously suggests this idea that at least up to a certain point in Zuko's life, he never has gone to the spirit world to see Iroh. It doesn't, I suppose, take away the fact that that could happen, in that maybe much later on Zuko will decide to go to the spirit world and have a final conversation with Iroh or something like that. But at the very least, it's sort of implying here it's not something that happens like immediately. Otherwise, I think they would have covered it in the book. But yeah, just pretty nice stuff overall. Like reading it out there, you can see like the writing is relatively good, even when it's not saying too much. It's still well written. It feels like the sort of thing Iroh or Zuko would say, and it does come together and is a pretty nice book. It's just, imagine what this book would have been if it had more to say about Lu Ten, if it revealed like who Lu Ten's mother is, if it went that little bit more in depth just on other characters and other things. One of the, I think, things that's most kind of weird about it, I think, in terms of something that's forgotten, is like Ursa isn't really mentioned much in this book. Like there's a few references to like your mother, but apparently, at least based on the comics, Iroh and Ursa were actually fairly close. Ursa cites, like, outside of her children, Iroh as being the one kind of light during a very dark time in her life. So why is there no mention in this whole book that Iroh is writing for Zuko about Ursa? I just think there should have been something. And I think that would have worked so well. Like, I would have liked to have seen, like, Iroh give his thoughts on, like what his perspective is on, like, Ursa, like, going missing and what he did or did not know and so on. How happy he was to see her again. Stuff like that. I think there's some stuff that's kind of clearly forgotten, even though very clearly stuff from the search is included in, like, the family tree section. In that, like, Ikem is there, Rina, Jinzuk, Ursa, Ki, but not Ursa, not mentioned so much. Similarly, like, I wish they'd maybe done a little bit more on Azulon, on Ozai, on Lu Ten himself, and it just feels like to give you just the slight basic introduction, but it is more than the previous books have done in terms of revealing content, in that the mention of Jai Bao being a little bit more clear-cut about the whole spirit world journey stuff works. And then in general, a lot of the writing is solid because it is Iroh. So it works on a lot of ways, but then just if you just want information is obviously where the book doesn't quite work. So I still would say like it's one of those ones where like of the three books, this is the one you probably should pick up. If you just want one of these books, this is the one you should pick up. I realistically struggle to recommend this book outside of the art, the Korra book. And then this one's sort of somewhere in the middle, in that it covers interesting ground because it's more on the ATLA characters sort of in between era that we don't know much about, but it really doesn't go that much in depth. There's a huge jump in quality from the first one of these books to the third, in that half of this book is really just like a previous book fact file thing that they added a few bits onto. Here at least it's all sort of like originally written stuff, while it still is mainly recappy of stuff that we have. There's at least a tease of some new stuff that I like. So it's one of those ones where like maybe a fourth book will be finally when they push it over the edge, but it more highlights that it's down to the rest of the story content to cover some of this. So some of this stuff isn't as big of a mystery anymore. So this extra material can just go that little bit more in depth. Tell the story where finally we learn about Lu Ten and who Lu Ten's mother is. Tell the story that finally reveals that Mei is Izumi's mother or something like that. So finally, that can just be a thing that doesn't need to be a secret anywhere it's in any way mentioned. So that's what I have to say here. So yeah, Legacy of the Fire Nation out tomorrow. There's my full spoiler review for the book. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the book and what I have to say about it. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.